All right, so I'm going to go through this Whitney Webb article. I don't know. I'm going to comment on some of what she's been talking about because I find some of it it's somewhere in between as usual. Like some people have been like, "Yeah, I told you, Bitcoin's a government psyop," and other people are like, "What? How dare you talk about my precious corn?" And she's got some good points, and some of it's just bullshit. So let's get into it. She says the biggest banks and a cadre of spooky currency speculators have funded and now control most of the infrastructure underlying Bitcoin. Brackets energy, chips, ISPs, and general crypto infrastructure, with the openly stated goal of having it be only an asset you don't and can't spend. All right, let's unpack it because it's a lot. Um, I think this is one of the most I think she actually makes some good points further down, but this beginning bit is total bullshit. Bitcoin did not exist and then everything else came around. Energy infrastructure, chip manufacturing, internet service providers, and financial stuff. Maybe not crypto infrastructure because it obviously didn't even exist until Bitcoin came around. But everything else already existed and was already fucking centralized. So it's not Bitcoin's not going to show up and suddenly, oh, isn't it great? The electrical grid isn't basically run by one company that the government allows to operate, and semiconductor manufacturing isn't just China and Taiwan. Suddenly, every country in the world is manufacturing semiconductors. Like, no, Bitcoin has to deal with the fact that that's just what the world looked like when it showed up, and actually, Bitcoin, particularly when it comes to energy, is one of the best possible ways we have of bringing genuine free market capitalism, competition, and redundancy into the energy world, which is unbelievable. And Bitcoin's doing an amazing job at that. Gridless is the best example of it, which is, guaranteeing businesses actual income if they go and set up new energy infrastructure in rural Africa where there's loads of villages and poverty stricken people with no electricity, and no one is going to take the risk of building power plants there because they don't have the guaranteed sales, right? And then Bitcoin miners have come along, the guys at Gridless, who I know and who are amazing. They're building out stuff in Kenya, and just saying to these people, if you build the energy infrastructure, we'll mine Bitcoin and we'll keep paying you for electricity, and we will use this much, and you can justify the capital expenditure. And then they go, good, we'll do it. And then a bunch of people that had no electricity suddenly have incredibly cheap electricity. It is perfect. They leapfrog everything. So, I just find that to be a remarkable benefit of Bitcoin coming around, and this permanently doom and gloom black pilled Whitney Webb is just never ever going to allow anything good to come from this thing. And I just find that really annoying because she does make some good points and she does say some things that are uncomfortable truths. That annoys me. ISPs, exactly the same situation, right? Like they were incredibly centralized. There's nothing Bitcoin can really do about that, right? Or at least, no, that's not my point. I'm more making the point that if it's going to be corrected, it's not going to happen overnight. Hopefully, if ISP, Bitcoin could be the catalyst for decentralizing that stuff. Certainly, like privacy networks were all kept in mind, and I2P and Tor are both sitting there inside Bitcoin, ready to be used. Even CJDNS. Shout out to John Attack for talking to me about that and explaining to me a little bit about how it works. We're thinking about it. Don't worry. If the ISPs want to start censoring Bitcoin activity, it would be great fun if they did, and it would spur on a lot of redundancy that we'd need to counter the centralization of ISPs. So again, it's like, how do you solve energy centralization, chip centralization, ISP centralization? Bitcoin can actually be a catalyst to all that stuff. So it's not all black. It's black and white, and it's gray, and not well put. Okay, anyway, she says all that is being, captured with the openly stated goal of having it be only an asset you don't and can't spend. Citation needed. Why are you saying that? And what are you talking about? I'm going to pontificate on this and say she's talking about one of two things. One is, oh, they didn't make the blocks bigger, so now the base layer is going to get really expensive, even though it hasn't yet. And Bitcoin Cash is the future, and I believe Kim.com and Roger Ver are correct. I don't think she's going down that path, and it's too dumb for me to even want to attack it here, so I'm not even going to bother. Number two is it's going to be captured, and even if it remains permissionless on the base layer and we don't pay any attention to the price of using the base layer, no one uses it that way. Everyone's using it within a centralized framework that has been put on top of it like some sort of KYC matrix that is permissioned, and if you don't get access to that walled garden, then you basically can't use Bitcoin, even though the base layer would still let you. It's just, where are you going to send the money? Because no one's going to accept it unless it also has this, arbitrary system of checks and balances and this bureaucratic stuff on top of it. That's already happened, right? So if she's making that point, then fair enough to her. That's true. And I think we have precedent for it. The example I've used to the point where I feel like people are starting to get bored of me saying it, but so what? I'll repeat it anyway. Email is the perfect example. Email is still a permissionless protocol, but you cannot use it in a permissionless capacity because no one else does. You need Google's permission, or Hotmail's permission, or Apple's permission, or some other big email service provider. You need them to allow you to have an account, because if you don't send emails from an email you have with an account on one of those platforms, it won't show up. So you can use email permissionlessly, but you need permission to access email the way other people are using it. So if someone says, I need 1 Bitcoin from you for a payment for my house or whatever in 10 years from now, and you send them the Bitcoin, but they don't recognize that they got sent a Bitcoin because they're receiving it via some third party that doesn't recognize the transaction because it wasn't whitelisted according to some government whitelist, right? So you can have stuff like that happen, and the KYC interpretation of this coin was bought there and that coin was bought somewhere else. All this is an attack on fungibility. It undermines Bitcoin's moneyness to no end. It's a massive problem. I hate it. It's not really spoken about all that much. I don't know which point she's referring to there. I'm inclined to think it's the former, which I decline to elaborate on here because it's just so stupid. If she wants to turn into a Bitcoin cash head, I don't think she is, because Whitney, I don't want to be too harsh here because I do think, she goes against the grain, and I don't want to shoot messengers, but I don't want to, I don't really want to credit her with having a deep understanding of Bitcoin either, because I think she doesn't really. I think she's just looking at it from a political lens and the kind of characters that are involved. But, what did you expect? Again, I didn't think we would wrestle the control of the world's the global reserve currency from the people I hate, who have mismanaged everything so much to their own advantage and to the ruinousness of Western everything. I didn't think we'd wrestle control of it from them with a new currency that they would have no access to. It doesn't work that way. I knew that BlackRock and all these assholes and Bill Gates and George Soros and all these people, they're going to buy lots of Bitcoin, and there's nothing I can do about it. Yes, it's a problem because he who controls the UTXOs can somewhat control the rules of the network, and that's another uncomfortable truth which he kind of gets into, and that's actually true. But, let's get to that. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. The US government and this small elite faction hold most of the Bitcoin. Not super sure about that. I think, I don't know how many Bitcoin the ETFs have. I think it's between 1 and 4 million. That's not most. That's not even, that's, what would it be? That'd be 20%. That's not most. It's a lot and a big problem, but it's not most. And once their financial control grid is complete, they will inflate its price through the roof. Why do you need this whole pretext? Just buy loads of it, and then the price will go up, and that's it. Bitcoin doesn't need to be any more complicated than we buy lots of it, and we get rich in the process. Because when we buy it, the price goes up, and then other people buy it, and maybe it crashes, but then we buy more when it crashes. So, I don't understand why you need this contrived, conspiracy that she gets into. I don't want to say, she's a conspiracy theorist, right? Because I'm a conspiracy theorist. I more agree with George Carlin that you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests naturally align. And in this case, yeah, there's a lot of aligned interests, but I just don't think it's. At the same time, I'm just like, I mean, all right, let's press on with it, and I'll try to give you my perspective on it. Because, as I said, half the people are just like, she's a fucking idiot, and other people are like, yeah, girl, you go. Bitcoin's just part of the psyop. It's controlled opposition. I'm like, it's neither of those things cleanly. It is genuinely a tool for freeing people, and it is genuinely quite captured at the same time. Like you have to be able to deal with the fact that both perspectives are correct, and everyone is taking one side or the other. It drives me crazy. Anyway, as Catherine Austin Fitz has said, one of the elite's plans, once you steal everything, you want to move to she calls it disflationary system. I think it's disinflationary is the correct term. I have heard that theory before. I've heard that was part of the general shenanigans that were carried out on the US monetary system, where they would keep changing it from this to that to the other to there are parts where you can cynically do disinflation to try and to bankrupt people, and as usual, the Keynesian people are not wrong about everything. They are wrong in principle, but there are certain circumstances in which they point things out correctly. And they talk about inflation being good for an economy, and it being the broken window fallacy is how the Austrians dismiss it. But the point is, you can do damage with disinflation can be nasty, right? It's not all good. It's just a more honest world, so we make do with it if we can ever actually be blessed with it. But that doesn't mean it's not going to have problems, right? The elites who have a lot of ties to the Epstein network, again, yes, rich assholes and pedophiles and politicians and all that, who were on pedophile island with Epstein. Yes, they're going to own lots of Bitcoin. We know they're not stupid. They're just evil, and their intelligence is what makes their evil so effective. But that doesn't somehow preclude them from buying. That doesn't exclude them from buying Bitcoin. If anything, it means they're going to be clever enough to know that they should. Just like, it's like the governments say criminals use Bitcoin. Bitcoiners say governments use Bitcoin, right? It's and I'm like, governments wear shoes too. That doesn't mean I'm not going to wear shoes. Governments drink water. That doesn't mean I'm not going to drink water. Like, evil people do things that I do too. That doesn't make those things inherently something I should avoid or inherently bad. So they hold so much Bitcoin collectively, and when currencies implode, which is something the currency speculators who back so much key crypto infrastructure have provably done in the past, pumping gold, silver, etc., pumping gold and silver instead would make too many other actors, including governments like China and Russia, very wealthy, while pumping Bitcoin will only make a specific, largely US-based cabal very wealthy. Bullshit. Calling total bullshit on this. Yes, China owns a lot of gold. Yes, Britain owns no gold. I get it. But I'm sorry, there is no breakwater there. You don't get to just go, haha, we'll own all the Bitcoin, pump that, and we'll dominate the earth. I'm sorry, it's free and open. Russia can buy Bitcoin too. If that becomes your strategy and you're trying to obfuscate it from the world and you're trying to pounce on us with this, I'm sorry, there is nothing to stop the Communist Chinese Party and the Russian regime and North Korea and anyone else from buying all the Bitcoin they want. Is El Salvador in on this? Or do we want to make El Salvador super wealthy? Doesn't seem to be that El Salvador is in the favor of the rotten system that, picks and chooses presidents and all that stuff. I mean, I agree with her general cynical take on the fact that everything is being orchestrated to some degree. But when it comes to this, I'm like, buying a whole bunch of Bitcoin, you cannot I keep saying that, you cannot exclude other people from owning Bitcoin. Who's to say Putin doesn't own a lot of Bitcoin? You can't. So how do you know you're not helping him out? You don't get to just say, hey, we own all the Bitcoin, therefore we'll cynically be in control of everything because no one else had the sense to buy any. No one knew we were going to do this. So Whitney Webb's figured it out. She's figured out what the fucking world grand scheme of the plans are to control everything, and it's via buying up all the Bitcoin and then erecting some surveillance state apparatus around it and controlling controlling the infrastructure of the financial infrastructure of the world. It all runs on Bitcoin, but all the Bitcoin is held by a bunch of American elites. Yeah, right. You figured it out, but China and Russia didn't notice. They didn't buy any for themselves. Bullshit. This is so stupid. It's just not. This is just utter shit. Like, she's made some really good arguments here. The owners of the UTXOs, that is a problem. If BlackRock owned 4 million Bitcoin and we get into a SegWit 2x scenario again, that is actually a problem. Fair enough to her, right? Capture of the system where everyone insists on using Bitcoin via third parties that gatekeep the whole thing. And now if I want to use Bitcoin as a sovereign user, I basically can't. That's a problem too. I agree with her. And then she comes up with this whack job theory saying that Russia and China aren't going to have the sense to stockpile any Bitcoin. America is going to surreptitiously buy all of it. That's just so fucking... how can you be that dumb? Anyway, I find that to be really annoying. Install their new and beyond Orwellian financial surveillance grid in place using Bitcoin as a reserve asset. All right, fair enough. Bitcoin is a massive surveillance nightmare. But this is the problem. You have competing principles that both try to align on the goal of human freedom. You have human freedom as a goal. You have sovereignty as a goal. You have different tactics by which you can get there. And some of them are fundamentally just opposed in approach. Privacy is something people conflate with all of the other characteristics of any tech that might offer you a path to freedom and sovereignty. And people conflate them like they're the same thing, and they are not. People need to go and do their homework and understand that privacy is its own unique thing. It tends to exist in temporary measure. It tends to be antithetical to any sort of technology, and there is very little we can do about that. And I don't want cypherpunks to sit here and tell me I'm full of shit, because let me elaborate on it before you dismiss what I'm saying. The principles that make Bitcoin as good as it is are anonymity, or at least pseudonymousness, transparency, permissionlessness, and these qualities, decentralization, all of these things require everything being done publicly and verifiably so that there is no trust anymore. That is completely at odds with operating in privacy, in secret. And people imagine there to just be one technological innovation away, but it just isn't. At heart, these are not the same approaches. I'm not saying either is valid and the other invalid. I'm just saying they don't mesh. Nostr is another perfect example of it. It's about freedom. It's about censorship resistance. It's about transparency. It's about sovereignty. And it's about pseudonymity. But you have this concept of linkability, which means if you do something under one identity that exists publicly for the entire world to see in a protocol that doesn't require an identity, that's pseudonymous. The problem is linkability. Everything can be linked to everything else. So you turn on your VPN and you do one thing and you think it's private, but you are signed into your email at the same time in the same browser, and that did something, and now that's linked to the other thing you did in private, and now they know that this guy is also this guy. So I have some Bitcoin I want to spend in something I want to be private, but my on-chain footprint links me to a whole bunch of other activity I did. So all that other activity might have been done anonymously, but this one thing I did where my identity contaminated it contaminates all of it because it's all linked together. Privacy is really, really hard to maintain in systems that have this transparent, self-verifiable element to it. And with something like Nostr, trying to use Nostr privately means basically using a new account with new hardware every single time you want to engage with it, and you'll never be able to build up anything that is conducive to a normal social media kind of experience. You get more followers, you get more zaps. It incentivizes building single accounts. You build up your single account, you do well, you get loads of followers, you get loads of engagement, you get loads of zaps. You're literally paid directly for it. The minute one thing becomes associated with your identity, all of it is now associated with your identity. That's what happens with pseudonymous networks that don't require permission and operate transparently. They're great for freedom and censorship resistance and all that, but they are a nightmare for privacy because that is just the world we live in and there's nothing you can do about it. So when people come along and criticize Bitcoin for the fact that it's not private, I sit there and go, what the fuck else are you going to do about it? Because if you want to use money privately, you need use something like cash and use it in small amounts and wear a face mask when you go and buy whatever it is you're buying. That's great. It's private, but it's not scalable because privacy never is scalable. And there are a ton of other problems with it too. Namely, you're using cash. Cash is still printed by governments. It still can be inflated. And all the other technological disadvantages, like you can't back it up and it could be counterfeited and all that crap. So privacy is just an absolute nightmare. And then you get into the pragmatic area of like, there's going to be, people have to die in wars, right? For mass civil disobedience to occur and for real change to happen, you actually need everyone to do things in public. And that's a horrible can of worms I don't even want to open. I'm not advocating anyone do it. I'm not the one about to martyr myself. But I'm just saying people need to. It's perfectly logical. I'm not calling anyone a coward. I'm just saying if you have the bravery to break an unjust law with your identity attached to it, to inspire other people to do the same thing, and enough people do it, we're talking like mass protests in some third world dictatorship where that's banned. Enough people do it that the government just says, all right, we'll give in, right? This is the Canadian trucker protest, right? It wasn't everyone privately messaging each other that they weren't happy, because you can do that till the cows come home. You needed actually public displays of civil disobedience. And then everyone goes, that's it. And it was one of the most successful things that's ever happened in Canadian history. That was it. That was the end of the COVID restrictions in Canada. It all died after that because people were ballsy and they did what they did publicly. And did lots of people suffer? Did lots of people have their bank accounts closed and they'd lose their jobs over it? Yes. It sucks, but that's actually how you make progress sometimes. So this is why I sometimes think the Bitcoin approach, the Nostr approach are great. Because people are going to get fucked by it, but it's going to push the envelope out and it's going to say, this is what we expect to be able to do. And this is why the privacy guys, I just think it's this niche thing. And it's such a temporary thing. It can win. It's amazing to use. And there are technologies that are conducive to it, right? You have PGP. You have public key cryptography in general. You have the ability to communicate privately. And it is beautiful, and I of course I love and celebrate it at the same time. I just think people conflate these things, and that's a huge mistake, right? There is nothing private about Bitcoin, and if it could be private too, of course that would be great. But when you look at the qualities what Bitcoin has and you try and shoehorn privacy into it, it's always an uphill struggle. It's always expensive, cumbersome, and fraught with peril because one mistake and you fucked it all up. And then you were acting like you were private when you weren't, which is a huge issue. It's better to sit there and say, hey, Bitcoin is doxed and public. I know it's all public. It's better to do that than try and be private if you don't know what you're doing. If you do know what you're doing, fair enough. Hats off to you, go and do it. But if you don't, just assume that you fucked up somewhere and that your identity is now all over everything you're doing on Bitcoin. So yeah, this is the thing I find frustrating about Whitney, but I have to bite my tongue on. She is a journalist. It's not her job to come up with some superior technology. She's just a messenger. She's just saying, hey, this thing is fucked. Here's a bunch of stuff that's wrong with it. What I find annoying is that it gets sensationalist and some of it's obviously bullshit, right? But I will give credit where it's due. Orwellian financial surveillance grid, she refers to as being a system put on top of Bitcoin. It's conducive to that. Yes, Bitcoin can absolutely allow one of those to exist. And we can just have exactly what happened with the internet happen with Bitcoin. Nightmare, don't deny it. It's going to be a pain in the ass. But the problem is every single person that thinks, that is aligned with this and wants to do anything about it will start telling you about Monero. And that, again, it's just like big blocks as a solution for not enough people being able to make transactions on a day-to-day basis because the on-chain activity is too expensive. Or It's again private. Bitcoin isn't private, so just use some modern cryptography in it to make it private. Okay, then you lose all the other qualities, and it's not going to work. It's just going to be a centralized private club for people that want to operate in the shadows, which is their absolute right to do, because they assume the continued existence of an evil authoritarian state that's going to oppress them in every other way. But at least they can financially, they can transact financially and escape it that way. To me, that's too defeatist. I know it, and the Bitcoin approach is too optimistic, which is that if we just live so absolutely freely and wonderfully and operate out in the light, that eventually those systems that try to oppress us will just die. Now, this is the reminiscent of Hunter S. Thompson's description of the 1960s, the way we would win, our energy would simply prevail. We were finally overcoming the forces of evil, and we would win this battle, and not in any mean or military sense. Our energy would simply prevail. Right? That's his characterization, beautiful characterization of the hippie movement in the 60s, and it's also just utopianistic nonsense. It doesn't work like that. That's not how it's going to go with Bitcoin. But again, it's a beautiful ideal, and I will still hold a candle to it because I still love it, even if I can concede that it's not particularly realistic. So financial surveillance happening on top of Bitcoin. Yep, I can't deny it. It's going to happen. It's a nightmare. I will do everything I can to try and prevent it. But again, I don't have a decent alternative to it. None of the privacy coins are any good. They're all centralized, and they are not. They don't have a hope of becoming decentralized, and they're also far more likely to have problems. Some of the problems Bitcoin's had, like the inflation bug, things like that, would not be things you could pick up on inside a privacy currency the same way. Not to mention they just can have other more fatal flaws just due to the more experimental nature of the technology, right? You want to use tried and true tech. Bitcoin is old tech, right? And we're very, very hesitant. We're very Luddite when it comes to this stuff in Bitcoin. We don't experiment around with it. So she goes on to say the US government, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street bankers who have economically and sometimes militarily waged war against much of the world are using Bitcoin for this and are buying, to set up the surveillance grid, the financial matrix thing. And they're buying up media influence to manufacture consent. I don't know. This just sounds like they have the media. They don't need to buy it. They already have it. A lot of the way she characterizes this right now is just to sound like it's all kind of in motion and it's kind of happening. And I'm like, dude, energy infrastructure, ISPs, they're not becoming centralized to try and turn Bitcoin into this Orwellian thing. They've been centralized and fucked forever. It's not getting any worse. In fact, it's getting a little bit better thanks to Bitcoin. The incumbent financial elite with ties to Epstein, it's always been this way. Nothing changes because of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, it does allow surveillance, right? But what we have with the US dollar is complete surveillance at the moment anyway. There's no massive advantage to them switching to Bitcoin, right? They clean up a bit of technical debt by getting rid of cash. But what can you fucking do with cash anyway now? If you're a drug dealer and you've got tens of thousands of dollars in your house in cash that you can't ever put in the bank, you can go out and go to a restaurant. That's about it. I haven't managed to. You can't buy a plane with it. You can't buy a car with it. You can just about, if you can find some people that you can't buy a house, but supposing you want to renovate your house and make it beautiful, you need to find someone that'll. You're going to go to Home Depot and spend 40 grand on like marble statues and stuff like that. They're going to ask your name and address. Like, you're going to have a difficult time doing it. Cash is basically useless now, which means, 99% of financial activity is complete surveillance, and they have the ability to control how much of it there is. With Bitcoin, they don't. So they can turn Bitcoin into a surveillance nightmare if they want, but then they have to still deal with the fact that they can't control the supply of it. It doesn't seem to me like a worthwhile trade-off for them. They don't really gain anything out of it. So it's like if Whitney Webb and the rest of us were occupying a world where there was some version of Bitcoin that actually had all the privacy characteristics that would make it immune to surveillance, or at least very resistant to it, And, people were all trading it peer to peer. There was no regulated crypto exchanges. There was no KYC. Every single person had their own private mini nuclear power plant, and that was how all mining was powered. If that world existed, fine. What she's talking about here is a nightmare, but it doesn't. We have absolute dog shit as an alternative to Bitcoin. So where do you get off coming after Bitcoin and being like, oh, it's all a fucking controlled opposition and captured? I'm like, you know what? It is somewhat captured. Mining is one of the worst elements of it, which she doesn't mention. Hyper shitcoinization, which is an influx of idiots coming in to turn Bitcoin into arbitrary file storage, doesn't mention that either. Her co-host on all of this bullshit she's doing is Mark Goodwin, who is ex-Bitcoin magazine, who has this apparent same blind spot for spam and shitcoins on Bitcoin, which totally undermines so much of the project. Ordinals undermine fungibility, which again, if money is not fungible, it's not money. That is just a fact. So, I digress. I'm just saying, I'm trying not to attack too much again, because as a journalist, it's not her job to sit here and tell us. She's not an activist. It's not her job to say you should do this or, here's a better currency. But I find this like black pill sensationalism to be so completely useless when it comes to, first off, a way to enjoy life. Like, I'm pretty black pilled as far as Bitcoiners go, but I've never had someone come up to me and be like, oh, Mechanic's just going to launch a shitcoin, or, he's just like hyping up non-issues, in order to grow his following or anything like that. And even the people that disagree with me on spam and mining centralization, I don't get accused of that. People just actually disagree with me on some of this stuff. But I don't get accused of grifting or shitcoining. But Whitney's post here reeks of it. It just sounds like there's some alleged privacy coin that Bitcoin should have just been, and it isn't because the CIA psyoped us all into thinking it. I take that back. That sounds like a bit of a straw man. I don't want to straw man her again. I don't. Because, like I say, I'm saying roughly 50% of this is genuinely concerning, and the other 50% is total bullshit. So anyway, the U.S. government, the what do you call them? The deep state, essentially, have economically and sometimes militarily waged war against much of the world, are using Bitcoin for this, which is, the construction of the Orwellian financial surveillance grid, and buying up media influence. No, they're not. They already totally have it. They've had it forever. I don't know why that's, As a consequence of the purchase of Bitcoin media, most Bitcoiners, instead of being up in arms about it and putting momentum behind any potential workaround, doesn't mention what that is or might be, or the fact that actually some of us identify problems in it and are trying to fucking work around them, which has literally been the last year of my life, as well as previous passion projects inside Bitcoin. Instead of that, Bitcoiners apparently are spending all their time shilling Tether and explaining away their overt partnership with the US national security state. All right, now here is where I loop back to the beginning and I go, are you just a Bcash FUD bullshit artist? Because we all know what happened. I'm not going to get into the finer details of this, but Bitfinex were why SegWit2x died. And SegWit2x dying is one of the most legendary, brilliant things that's happened in Bitcoin's history. And it happened specifically because of the way Bitfinex worded a contract. That was not the entire reason. A lot of the UTXOs went in the hands of people that wanted to kill SegWit2x. But when it came down to the way that specific futures market was implemented, the risk, if you were neutral on it, the way the contract was worded meant it was less risky putting your money on the Bitcoin horse than the SegWit2x horse. And that was how SegWit2x was killed. And SegWit2x, as Giacomo's pointed out, was not a technical concern. It was a political concern. It was a bunch of people saying, hey, we'll give you what we want on a technical level, which is slightly bigger blocks and SegWit. But you have to use our client and you have to accept the fact that we proposed this and we told you you're getting it and you said, all right, do it. They wanted to set the precedent that a bunch of corporate dickheads could take over Bitcoin's development, and they failed, and we ended up with the same tech anyway. I'm looking at the blocks now. They're all almost 2 megabytes, and we have SegWit. So SegWit 2x basically fucking happened, except it wasn't a hard fork and it wasn't done by a bunch of Brian Armstrongs and Vinnie Linghams and all that stuff. But here's the thing. Every exchange in the space, every wallet in the space was ramming SegWit 2x down our throat. And Bitfinex came out and allowed us to put our money where our mouth was and dump the thing before it existed in a futures market. And they gave the favor to us. They didn't align with everyone else. And they were hated by the big blockers because of this. But Bitfinex is behind Tether. It's the same people. So when all this controversy was going down, there was an account that came around called Bitfinexed. 7 years later, this guy is still around telling everyone that Tether is going to implode any day now and it's all fraud. A whole bunch of people have latched onto this. Whitney is one of the most annoying ones about them. She has other concerns around them. The ties between Tether and people she, I'll get more into that. But this is a big topic. I'm hoping I can address it here because it's kind of been a bee in my bonnet for a while. Anyway, there was a lot of animosity towards Tether that didn't exist towards other stablecoins, which have since collapsed and were fraudulent. Terra Luna is a great example of it, right? Pumped relentlessly by crypto influences, Raoul Pal being a good example. You can stake the network, get 20% risk-free, and the thing depegged and fucking died, and loads of people lost their money. I'm sure people commit suicide over it. Where were all the people calling bullshit on that? They were Bitcoin maxis. There were people like Corey Clipston from Swan. People that were saying this is bullshit and it's going to collapse. And it did collapse. Tether is the one that sits there all day with everyone saying it's going to collapse any day now. That was 7 years ago that Bitfinex account came around, and he's still around today telling you that any day it's going to collapse. It hasn't. What do I think about stablecoins? What do I think about Tether? I'll get into that in a minute. But I'm saying this has been one of the pivotal things Whitney has gone on about for ages. And it's been this concern she has over Tether and the dollarization of Bitcoin. And this has been a thing she's been talking about with Marty Bent and Odell and Mark Goodwin. And she's been on a whole bunch of podcasts about it. And this is the issue. I know Tether. I know the people that work on it. And I know what the deal is with them. And I know the kinds of, I don't know them super well, but I've watched them be attacked. I've watched the initial suspicion around them be created by salty big blockers that were pissed off that Bitfinex killed SegWit 2x and stopped Bitcoin from having a hard fork to larger blocks. Instead, it had a soft fork to slightly larger blocks in a way that can't really be repeated, I don't think. I'm going to leave that. But that was the initial hatred for there was USDC, Terra Luna, and a whole bunch of other, like Binance has their own stablecoin too. They don't get any hate. And as I said, one of them completely collapsed and just went to absolute death, killing like the value of anything that anyone had in it. No one was attacking that. It was only Tether, and it wasn't motivated for reasons of, the dollar is evil and you're perpetuating it and helping it to exist longer in a world where Bitcoin might take over if it wasn't for these stable coins prolonging the life of fiat and all that. So here's my defense of stable coins. Here it comes, right? Get ready to clip this and take it out of context. I use fiat every day. I have a credit card. I have a mortgage. I have to buy insurance for things. Certain things I can only have attached to a line of credit. Certain things require a bank account. I have to constantly get on planes and book these things. Yeah, I can pay for them in Bitcoin. But even as blessed as we are in Canada to have bills, BYLLS, which is attached to Bull Bitcoin and allows me to pay pretty much any bill I can with Bitcoin, I still don't do it because of the way the taxation system is set up here. I still get paid in fiat, and I still pay my bills in fiat because I have to pay a lot less tax that way. And I have the privilege of using a relatively functional fiat currency. Obviously, I don't store my long-term savings inside the Canadian dollar because it's obviously all going to lose purchasing power rapidly. And I wouldn't use the pound sterling or the Japanese yen or even the US dollar for it, which is the world's best fiat. But I still use these fucking things every day, and they're integral to my quality of life. So when I see people in third world countries that have absolute crap fiat, one of the 160 or so fiat currencies around the world that are absolute garbage, that will hyperinflate and lose 95% of their purchasing power in a month or something insane like that. If those guys who do not have the kind of money to be experimenting with fucking Bitcoin, opening lightning channels, and they don't have the money or the mental capacity. They have the mental capacity. They don't have the time to start learning about Bitcoin because they're too busy trying to keep their life in order. I don't begrudge them for using something like Tether because it gives them access to a functional fiat currency. No one's pretending it's going to go to the moon and it's the next Bitcoin. It's not a substitute for that. It's not a scam coin. No one's pretending it's decentralized either. It's centralized. It's fiat. It's just that if I use fiat every day, you don't get to sit here and moralize about it. I do know a few people that actually live on the Bitcoin standard, and I've argued with this about them, and they're saying you could do it if you really want to. But I haven't been able to do it. So I'm a complete hypocrite if I'm going to moralize about Tether, right? Now, you can get into the circumstances of it, because her accusation is not any of that ideological objection to it, right? She's just saying they're trying to hyper-dollarize Bitcoin. They're trying to build Taproot assets on top of it, right? That's what the Lightning Labs team are doing. They want to make it so that dollars are natively moving around on Bitcoin. And this is all, I don't feel like, I feel like a lot of it really is just conjecture, because it doesn't make any kind of sense when I look at what I know personally, and I say the people behind Tether, like, look at Bitfinex's relationship with the US government. If you want a Bitfinex account, you can do it as long as you're not a US citizen. That's the kind of relationship they have, right? You can have a Binance account, I think. I don't know. I'm not in America, right? But you can have a Coinbase account, right? They play ball. You can have a Swan account. You can have a River account. Bitfinex is completely just, the relationship they have is just completely antagonistic. They despise each other. I find it laughable, the idea that Paolo and the guys behind Tether have some sort of backroom deal with the CIA. I just, like, on a personal level, I'm telling you, this is bullshit. And you can spread rumors about it all you like, but ultimately, I don't think it's going to shake out that way, and I don't think the U.S. government need it. I think ultimately Tether is annoying to the U.S. government. I don't think they like it at all. They already have control over everything everyone does with the U.S. dollar anyway. What the fuck advantage does Tether give? All Tether means is, for fuck's sake, a bunch of people in Argentina are now getting the luxury of using the United States dollar without having to go through the normal middlemen we forced them to go through. They can just download some Blockstream wallet or something and have Tether on Liquid, and there's nothing we can do about it. To me, that does not sound like the US government cynically planning that and making the whole world dependent on the US dollar in some roundabout way when it already is in the first place. To me, that's just bullshit, and I'm not having it. So, where was I in this tweet? As a consequence of the purchase of Bitcoin media, most Bitcoiners, instead of being up in arms about it and putting momentum behind any potential workaround, again, doesn't mention what the workaround is, are spending time shilling Tether. None of us are shilling Tether, okay? I'd never met a single Bitcoiner that's shilling Tether. And this was, again, the accusation among salty big blockers was the only reason Bitcoin won in the whole scaling war and the block size war is because they printed a bunch of Tether and used it to buy Bitcoin, and they never really had the assets. Every single time that accusation has been made, it turned out they do have the assets, which is why Tether is the stablecoin that hasn't collapsed. This is not me pumping Tether, right? Or shilling Tether, rather. Okay, she doesn't say pumping because, it's not supposed to pump, which is, again, one of the reasons I don't consider it a shitcoin. But no one's promoting it. I'm not telling you to hold Tether. All I'm saying, that this is the sum total of my advocacy and shilling of Tether, is that I use fiat every day and I don't have to use Tether, and I'm not going to chastise an Argentinian for using it or a Venezuelan for using it when they should use Bitcoin when I still use fiat. That's it. If you want to call that shilling Tether, go ahead. What I'm doing for Tether is I'm saying the attacks are from people that are pissed off because they lost the scaling war and they think that Bitfinex was the reason they lost it. They can't ever. People like Roger Ver, free market maximalists, that assume that if you just opened it up to the free market and Core stopped centrally planning, the size of blocks, Bcash would win immediately. And the only reason it didn't is because market manipulation. I'm sorry, cry harder, man. That wasn't market manipulation. That was markets. You lost. Get over it. And for some reason, I just feel like she sort of drank a lot of that Kool-Aid. Because I don't know a single Bitcoiner ever that shills Tether. Bitcoiners shill Bitcoin, not Tether. Bitcoiners are not into US dollar. They're not into US dollar derivatives. They're not into things like Tether. If they were, they wouldn't. It's just, how can you make that? I hate the fact that she says that because there's no basis for that. I've never seen it. And explaining away their overt partnership with the U.S. national security state. I don't know of Tether having a partnership with the U.S. national security state. They have to jump through a bunch of regulations like any fucking company that does anything to do with money in the world. Sure, sue them. They're going to do it. I'm not explaining it away, but at the same time, I can say Whitney Webb, someone collaborating with the Inland Revenue Service. I'm like, yeah, right, because she has a job and paid her taxes and didn't want to go to jail. It's something of that nature. I'm not going to call you a collaborator with the IRS. You're just doing what you have to do to be able to exist. And I find that so ludicrous. I give money. I've donated money to a government that dropped bombs on Iraqi civilians, right? Like, yeah, because if I didn't, I would be in jail. Like, live in the fucking real world, man. And we shill for dollarized debt posing as anti-state and anti-bank. I am anti-state and I am anti-bank. I don't have a better way of undermining the state and getting rid of middlemen like banks than Bitcoin. I'm not shilling for dollarized debt. I don't know what the fuck you are talking about. Anyway, so then it finishes with a plug. My series with Mark Goodwin has been exploring these issues more. Yeah, so my overall take is I think she's got two good points. And the rest of it is just, come and watch my dramatic bunch of, radical theories about how Bitcoin's totally captured and no one's paying attention. And that's my take on it, guys. I think it's largely... Yeah, I'm gonna be generous and say it's 50% bullshit and 50% accurate. In reality, I think it's a bit worse than that. And I think let's maintain positivity. Bitcoin totally has problems, and all I ever do in my life, day in, day out, is try and come up with solutions for those problems and make things better, and not gaslight myself about where we're at. Bitcoin has major centralization issues. Everyone is using Bitcoin Core, 95% of people at least. Bitcoin Core is not working the way it should be. It's failing in its obligations to protect the network and maintain its monetary properties. This is a massive issue, and I've been complaining about it for a year. She doesn't mention that. Mining is utterly centralized apart from the hash rate, but when it comes to template construction, which is where the ability to censor or not comes in, you have a handful of players doing all of it. She doesn't mention that. All of the coins coming out of the chain are going into the hands of the same couple of people and the same couple of entities, namely Kobo and Foundry. She doesn't mention that. And the spam that's been hitting Bitcoin for the last year and a half has caused us to lose the lowest end hardware that people would realistically use. It's bloated the UTXO set, which makes IBD way slower on almost everything. That if that were to continue as it has been, we're gonna increasingly have to spend a greater and greater amount, outpacing inflation, in order to just have hardware that's capable of syncing up to the network. This is incredibly bad for decentralization, and it comes with an influx of people with a mentality that is defined as short-term pump and dumps, don't care about distributed, decentralized enforcement of the rules, quintessential shitcoiners flooding into the ecosystem, open border policy, yada, yada, yada. Doesn't mention that. I didn't realize who Mark Goodwin was when I first watched him and Whitney complaining about Tether on Marty Bent's show. And I messaged him like, what the fuck? You're like out here complaining about subtle, nuanced problems in Bitcoin, and you've somehow not mentioned at all the fact that 95% of block space is spam, and it's been a massive freaking problem, and we've like, and he's like, oh, that's not a real problem. I'm like, hey, what? You guys aren't serious at all. So that was very frustrating to deal with. I messaged him about it and then realized he worked for Bitcoin Magazine and thought, oh, right, of course. And then blocked him, and he will remain blocked forever, most likely. Anyway, me and Mark are exploring these things, and we have a spicy installment dropping tomorrow. Amazing. So, yeah, I was trying to round it off on some sort of moral note, moral of the story. I think it's important not to become... She kind of reminds me of Noam Chomsky, and that's just someone that like has actually done a lot of research and knows what's wrong with everything, and to a person to who you can listen for maybe half an hour a month, and any more than that makes you want to just blow your head off. So it's boring. It's incredibly demotivating and disempowering. There's implications of some sort of entity. This is the part, right, where she says, and instead of us putting any momentum behind any potential workaround for what? You want me to work around very rich people buying lots of Bitcoin? I have no fucking workaround for that, okay? I'm not going to destroy the neutrality of the system. That sounds communist. Like, rich people own too much Bitcoin. Forget it, man. Like, what... I just think, yeah, it's just black pill. It's deep, deep black pill. And the thing is, it's not like retarded Monero head, like black pilling, where it's like Bitcoin is a CIA op and, just because they don't want to use privacy coin. It's not that, right? It's a bit more intelligent than that. But kind of not really. It's just a lot of window dressing for basically Bitcoin sucks. And it's controlled opposition, and it's completely captured. And I'm saying, look, man, you can't have something get to the level Bitcoin has gotten to without there being pockets of centralization and regulatory capture. The point is, it's an everlasting battle. We need to keep going. We need to fight it. We need to be honest with ourselves around where the problems are. And to just sit there and go, you're not doing that. You're pumping tether instead. I'm like, this is ridiculous. It really is. And I don't know who the audience is. I think the audience is, I don't know. I think it's people within the sort of, I just think there's a contingent of people that fall on that other side of that sort of dichotomy I posted of like the people that think, oh, it's all going to be fine, and kumbaya, versus the people that think everything is a psyop. It doesn't matter what there is, nothing good can ever happen. And if there's ever any positive movement in anything at all, it's not organic. It was the fucking CIA that planned it. Like, I can't stand these people because no one has that godly amount of control over world events. They just don't. And emergent things happen, unpredictable events happen. And I used the trucker movement as an example. The trucker movement in Canada was not a CIA op. And you can tell very clearly when it's not a CIA op, because they have a hostility to it immediately. And yeah, sure, a lot of the hostility to Bitcoin has disappeared, but a lot of that's just because a lot of very rich people bought a lot and want to make their environment more permissive, and they don't understand how they've damaged the thing in doing that. But yeah, okay, yeah, I think just when it comes to these kinds of black pillars like Whitney Webb and like Noam Chomsky, when it comes down to it, where's the courage? You have to be a bit naive, and you have to accept that things aren't going to be perfect, and you must present credible alternatives. Like, Bitcoin is not it's not going to just be fine. It does need us to work and protect it and make sure it continues to go in the right direction. All of that is true. And I just don't, I don't see this is ultimately my point, I guess. I can wrap up the video here. I don't see anything in this piece as being something any Bitcoiner can look at and go, that's a problem. Let's work on that. The problems we have in Bitcoin Core and the problems we have in mining, They're very fixable. You can decentralize template construction. We're very close to it. You can pay out lots of miners in Coinbases. You can do what Jack's doing, which is try and manufacture an ASIC somewhere that doesn't require the same old guard in Taiwan and China. Those are very real things you can do, right? And okay, she does allude to centralization of chip manufacture, but we're trying to do it. We want to do it, and we agree. But when it comes to people using Tether, I have as much problem with people using Tether as I do French people using the euro. That's it. Like, they're going to use it because, like, how much time do I like the euro? No, I don't like the euro. Do I begrudge someone buying a sandwich in France with €5? No, obviously I don't, because they want to eat some food and the sandwich shop only takes euros. Like, I'm going to build the alternative financial world with Bitcoin with the rest of you guys. I love doing it. Has the world caught up yet? No. Is Bitcoin ready yet? No. So, just what do you want from us, man? Like, that's basically the way I feel about the whole thing. I don't get the black pill. I'm somewhere in between. Bitcoin has some annoying issues. I argue a lot, but I basically think, we'll figure it out. By one way or another, we'll get there. All right, I'm signing off. Thanks for watching.